You're listening to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, your home for holistic, evidence-based cognitive enhancement strategies. And now your host, Eric Levi.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, where we discuss using nootropics, biohacking, and nutrition to help you boost your cognition. If it is your first time here checking out the podcast and you like what you hear as we go along, please remember to subscribe. And if you are really digging the content and you have some feedback for us, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review and leave a review over there. Any questions, comments, concerns you have about things we talk about in the podcast or health and wellness in general, nootropics, biohacking, anything like that, head on down and leave that right there in the comments of if you're watching the video. That's always best as well. And if you are someone who is interested in finding the best quality supplements and nootropics on the market today, head on over to holisticnootropics.com and download a copy of my free supplement buying guide. This is a fully comprehensive guide that will walk you through ingredient by ingredient on how to find the best quality products that are out there on the market today, because as my guest, Dr. Matt Chalmers, knows, there's a lot of junk being sold out there on the market. The supplement industry is a $100 billion industry, and I would reckon to guess that most of it is absolute hot garbage, ends up in the toilet, and does not do anything beneficial for you. So if you want to find the best quality supplements and nootropics you can buy on the market today, again, holisticnootropics.com, right there on the homepage, you can download a copy of my free supplement buying guide. All right, let's jump into today's podcast with Dr. Matt Chalmers. Dr. Chalmers is a health and wellness expert, author, podcast host, and speaker who specializes in the areas of long-term wellness, nutrition, women's health, weight loss, athletic wellness, and holistic healing. His most recent book, Pillars of Wellness, explains to readers how they can cut through the information overload about wellness and exercise and diet to figure out the actions they can take that will have the greatest impact. Dr. Chalmers, welcome to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Yes. I'm really looking forward to talking to you because you have a very interesting set of skills. You know, you're a chiropractor by trade, but then you've kind of branched out into these other areas of health and wellness. And I always find, it's the chiropractors that are kind of on the front lines of this holistic health movement, because really at the end of the day, your whole world, your whole area of focus is about how can we physically manipulate the body to make it work better. And then, what can be the life benefits of that. So I do want to talk about all that stuff. But before we do, I'd love to know your story. How did you become interested in health and wellness? What is your superhero story? And specifically, what brought you to, what you're working with today?
So I got into chiropractic because I ended up hurting my back and I couldn't walk. I went to all the different docs and everybody, and nobody could figure it out. Ended up going to my chiropractor, getting adjusted, and went back to practice 3 days later. So that's what got me started. And then I was working on a patient 15 years ago that had just sold his business for $20 million. The guy's 60 years old, but his health is so shot that he couldn't do anything with his 20 million bucks and his extra time. And that's when I was like, nope, that's not going to be me. I got to go through and research and find out everything I can to make sure that my friends, my family, and myself can be where we need to be. And so that spent me, thousands of hours of research stuff. So that's kind of where we are up till today. So it's been able to figure out how to fix plantar fasciitis and carpal tunnel and all sorts of different neurologic issues, lots of gut issues and stuff like that. So it's been really beneficial up to this point.
And so you were already in practice as a chiropractor before you kind of came to that realization.
Correct.
And it was the fact that, what brought you to that? It was the fact that you were working on a guy who was so successful, but he didn't have his health, and that was like an epiphany for you, or how does that work?
Yeah, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they open a business, no matter what it is, whether they're selling cars or cleaning windows or chiropractic, they always say, well, one day I'll do really well and I'll make a bunch of cash, and that's kind of my goal. And that was kind of the same goal. And then I realized this guy did exactly that thing, but didn't have his health in mind, didn't have his whole being figured out and thought through. And so he got to his goal. He made a bunch of money, but he was so screwed up he couldn't do anything with it. And I was like, no. I got to change my goals. I got to live the highest quality of life for the longest possible time. And that's when everything really kind of started falling into place. I was like, look, I can do this research. I can figure this out. So I'm just going to have to. So past 10, 12 years, I've been waking up at 4 a.m. every day and reading for a couple hours so I could figure out the best path for everything that we've got going on.
So when you work with somebody like that, like I know you work with a lot of different people, and we'll talk about the athletic side of it and the hormones and other, but if you're working with somebody, and that could be a person who's typically listening to this, like they're an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, or just somebody who really wants to become optimized. They're like, I want to be that guy who sells a business for $60 million or $20 million. I want to be, I want that longevity. I want that career success. What is a number one or one or two things that you see that a hard charging person like that, typically it just slips by them. They just don't get it as they're, putting in all the time to become successful?
So the big problem is that the higher stress we have, the more damage it does to the body. So from a neurologic aspect, it shifts us from parasympathetic, which is resting, digesting, to sympathetic, which is fight, flight. The problem is that we become much more insulin sensitive at that point, and our testosterone takes a massive dive. So you're going to end up having a lot more carbohydrate functional desires and cravings, which, depending on how your body's set up, could end up creating massive problems for you. But the biggest issue is that you're going to lose your testosterone. As you lose your testosterone, everything in your body starts literally just disintegrating. So that's some of the big stuff we see. So when we get younger guys in, the first thing we do is we check their sleep system, make sure they're sleeping properly, they're breathing at night, their hormone levels are where they need to be. And then we go through and remove all the inflammation out of their body. But that's kind of the big piece, is balancing that stress and balancing that struggle that everybody goes through as an entrepreneur.
And because so much of like the most available foods are carbohydrates. So, if you're working late or if you're working just long hours, you don't have time to go make, some beautiful meal with like a ribeye or like a high protein, meal, or something with high fat in the right proportion. It's like you're grabbing like a croissant, or you're grabbing a bagel, or you're grabbing, you might grab a bowl of cereal, which is crazy that like all of these breakfast foods that we start our days with, it's just all high carb, all high refined carbohydrates, all high sugar, frosting, like the whole nine, right? We're basically eating cakes at the beginning of the day. But like what you said is so interesting, because it's so true. And I think about this all the time, which is the blood sugar hormonal dance, right? They both work together. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you mentioned insulin sensitivity playing directly into testosterone. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about how those two things kind of play together.
So depending on how your body's constructed, your somatotype, sugar is going to play either a really important role, like you need a ton of it, or you need to stay directly away from it. And so what ends up happening is, like you said, all these things are quick grabs that are going to, a bagel can sit out at room temperature for 4 days and not kill you. You can't make eggs or make a steak and leave it out for 4 days and still be like, that'll be healthy for you. So that's one of our big issues. So you gotta have to plan ahead. So if you're an endomorph like I am and you can't consume any sugars, then you've got to plan out your meals all the way in advance. Because like we were talking about earlier, the way that your body processes sugars is extremely important. So if you're like myself, it creates tremendous amounts of inflammation. So we're going to have brain fog. We're going to have massive fatigue, irritability. We're going to hold all of those extra energy units, those calories, as fat. And so the fat then produces its own hormones, leptin and ghrelin. That creates all sorts of other problems. But as all those things are going through, like I said, because of the stress coming up and the cortisol levels coming up, your body quits producing testosterone almost entirely. So we'll see 30-year-old men with testosterone that's 150, and we need it at 1,000. And so they'll come in and be like, man, I'm tired. I can't think. I just have no drive. I'm just burnt out. And we'll check it all up, and we'll give them get their testosterone levels back up, and all of a sudden everything's back to where it's supposed to be for a while. But then we've got to make sure that their methylated B vitamins are up, their sugar functionality is where it's supposed to be. So we got to balance everything through. But that hormone piece of how your body communicates, which is what a definition of hormone is really, really important. And the problem is that if you're 40 where if you're 25 to 40, you got this massive indoctrination from the government that steroids or testosterone is cheating and terrible for you and the worst that you can do and all that type of stuff. And it's 100% a lie. Testosterone is probably the safest and the most important thing we can put back into our body to make it actually function properly. And then, 20 years ago in the 80s, that's a lot more than 20 years ago now, I guess I'm old. They told us that we should all eat carbohydrates because fat or cholesterol is going to give you all heart attacks and strokes, which is also a massive lie. So getting the nutrients in, getting the hormone levels where it's supposed to be is super duper important to actually just maintaining normal function.
So when you're working with somebody, then are you using testosterone replacement therapy or like bioidentical hormone, or do you have other ways to help get that testosterone up?
So depends on how old they are. So if they're 35 and they're like, no, man, I've had all the kids I want as men, I'm good to go. We can use injectable testosterone. If they're younger, we'll use kisspeptin, which is a peptide or HCG, to increase the natural drive for the body to produce its own testosterone. The only problem with that is that it makes the testicle work harder. So it's going to produce more sperm. They're going to become much more fertile. So everybody needs to understand that if they're playing with peptides, specifically kisspeptin, to increase their testosterone, they're going to be more fertile. And so I just make sure everybody understands that. But you have to convince the body to go that way. The problem is that the body naturally, in that fight flight mode, when it's scared and freaked out and in sympathetic state, it's like, look, we don't need to worry about testosterone right now. We need to get away from the danger. And so it produces a lot of cortisol, and your body can only choose cortisol or testosterone. It can't produce both. And so what ends up happening is you produce all this cortisol, but you don't produce any testosterone because we never come out of this stressed out, flight state. We don't produce the hormones we need. So as long as you're going to have a high amount of stress, naturally your body is going to require you to just add in those hormones or radically reduce the stress and increase all the nutrition. So I always talk to them like, how much of this stress can we get rid of? If they're like, well, I love my kids, I love my wife, I love my job, I can't get rid of any of it. Well, then we're going to have to do something to support the body naturally on the other side. So that's kind of how that piece goes. Now, if someone was like, yeah, I can get out of this toxic relationship and, I have another job lined up that's a whole lot less stressful, I'll be cool. Great. Then we can radically increase selenium. We can increase, Trivis terrestis is a great one. Methylated B vitamins, food for the adrenals, and the body will start to produce its own testosterone again. But if we're going to stay in that stress, we're going to have to do something to balance that. And that's typically where we go outside.
And what was that one you mentioned after selenium? You mentioned selenium and then something else. I didn't catch what that one was.
Tribulus terrestis.
Tribulus terrestis. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a pretty standard staple for people to use. Selenium is a mineral that people don't get enough of. So we usually start with that. And then the tribulus, we'll bring in a couple other things, horny goat weed and stuff like that. But the amino acids, and the biggest one is they're going to make sure that they're consuming enough nutrients for the body to make cholesterol. So all hormones, D3, testosterone, estrogen, they're all based on cholesterol. So if we're not consuming enough nutrients, basically cholesterol, for our body to then make the cholesterol to make the hormones, we've got to make sure that they're getting that in their diet.
Right. And then, so what do you say to somebody though, they jump on a diet like that, they jump on a high fat, high cholesterol diet, which sounds awful. I know to a lot of people, it's like, oh my God, high cholesterol. It's like you start eating eggs, you start eating, steaks, you start eating fat, coconut oil, whatever it is, their cholesterol starts going up. Their LDL cholesterol goes up. They start panicking. My doctor says, I gotta stop eating all these eggs. You got me eating, 4 eggs a day, Dr. Chalmers. And now my cholesterol's off the charts. Like, what do you tell them? Where do you go from there?
Well, first of all, what we all have to understand is that a lot of the nutrition that we're being told, specifically by medical practitioners, medical doctors get anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours of actual classroom education on nutrition. So they're still following stuff like most of the medical doctors I teach and I work with, no less than the house moms and the soccer moms that are coming to me having nutrition conversations. So first of all, the cholesterol we eat is not the cholesterol that's in our body. It's like saying, hey man, you have really big muscles and you eat a lot of chicken. Are those chicken muscles or are those people muscle? Well, my body breaks down the proteins into amino acids, absorbs the amino acids and constitutes and rebuilds human tissue in my body. When you eat cholesterol, it's broken down into individual components, absorbed into the body, and then your body then makes the cholesterol it wants at the liver. What I'm tracking right now is that there's a number of different reasons why we have higher cholesterol that are all massive warning signs to us that the body is not producing and developing all of the things it needs. So I should have that research done in about 6 months so we can present it and show that this is why we actually have cholesterol and what we need to do about it. The biggest issue is if you have, regardless of your cholesterol ratings, if you have any family history of heart attack or stroke, or you're worried about that, you need to go get calcium CTs, Doppler ultrasounds, look at the blood vessels, look how much plaquing is in there. That plaquing is from inflammation that is then damaging the blood vessels. It leaks tissue factor and fibrinogen and things like that. Then any amount of cholesterol, whether you have a low cholesterol, good cholesterol, whatever, any amount of cholesterol will then plaque on those arteries to repair the damage. Now, the problem is if you never remove the inflammation, if you never remove those things that are creating problems, you're going to get more and more and more plaquing. The problem is that we don't look at inflammation. In fact, it's now illegal for a lot of supplement companies to talk about inflammation because, yeah. So like I'm partnered with 2 different large supplement companies, and we're going through the whole thing. They're like, okay, you can't say inflammation at all. We legally can't mention the word inflammation. And I was like, that's the entire reason we're cleaning the liver and the kidneys. And they're like, yeah, but we legally cannot say it. So they're trying really hard to hide the idea that inflammation is as big of a problem as it is, specifically for blood vessels. So that's gonna be one of those big things, is removing that inflammation, cleaning the liver, getting the oxygen into the body to denature and move out this inflammation. Is gonna be your biggest function. But remember, when you have inflammation, your body also uses oxygen to denature and destroy that inflammation. If it uses up too much oxygen, you don't have enough for your heart and your brain to function. So you have more fatigue, your brain doesn't work as well. So the higher inflammation you're going to end up having, the worse your entire body's going to run.
Wow. And you're measuring inflammation how? With CRP or?
So CRP is a decent way to do it. There's a whole lab set that we use. Homocysteine is a great one. C-reactive protein is a good one. There's a number of other levels that we can look at. Testosterone is actually one of the things I look at for long-term inflammation and stress. The lower it is, the more damage we've got. Estrogen levels, those sort of things. But that inflammation is in pH. pH is a really big one. But as we go through those are really where we're tracking it, is how we're pulling those out. Lactic acid is another big one.
And lactic acid, typically we associate with like weightlifting, right? Or exercise. Are you seeing a lot? I mean, obviously you're probably seeing a lot of high inflammation in athletes, a lot of overtraining. Are you seeing something like overtraining or inflammation in athletes affecting other areas of like an athlete's health?
Yeah, we actually see that a tremendous amount. So we'll see a lot of gut issues from overtraining. We'll see, everything is, when you overtrain, everything in the body ends up being damaged. Ligaments, tendons, musculature, and nothing's healing at the rate it needs to. And so when we see overtraining for like 2 weeks, it's not a huge issue. But when people are starting to overtrain, like a lot of youth athletes are way overtraining and they're not giving their body the time to regenerate. Some of these kids are, like, I work with a lot of Olympic hopefuls, like testing to go to the Olympics at that level. And so we'll put them in hyperbaric chambers so we can make sure the oxygen levels get really, really high. And then we'll use tons of anti-inflammatory stuff. So lots of different turmeric stuff. We'll use, lots of CoQ10, lots of methylated B vitamins, lots of histidine, the amino acid, to flush out, denature, and move all this stuff through. But then we got to make sure they sleep a lot. Mm-hmm. And so high quality sleep is a really big deal. It's funny, the more research I do on sleep, the more I tell everybody I'm the princess from The Princess and the Pea, because I have a Sleep Number bed. I've got the adjustable base. I've got the air cooling mattress, the chili pad type of mattress on top. I've got my CPAP. I've got essential oils in my CPAP. My CPAP's hooked up to an oxygen concentrator so that we can keep the oxygen as high as possible while I'm asleep. So,
wow. Well, yeah, that's no joke. How do you like the CPAP? Is that something you chose to do, or is that like a medical necessity thing?
So I have a 19-inch neck and I have a 50-something inch chest, so it's a necessity for me. But the oxygen concentration that's added into it, I started doing when we started treating COVID issues. And that made a massive difference for everybody else, the oxygen, the hyperbaric function for them. And so I just added it in as something else to do for me, because I like to keep my oxygen sat at about 96, 97, 98 while I'm asleep. Mm-hmm. And so that's just been something that I've added in just as I did this experiment. After about a week, I was like, I'm not stopping this. I feel awesome.
That's awesome. Do you do any sleep tracking with like an Oura ring, Whoop strap, any of that stuff?
Yeah, I do. I do quite a bit. How well I sleep is pretty solid, but the thing I'm more worried about is the oxygenation. Like a lot of people, you're going to see a lot of people, that sudden adult death issue. A lot of that is because we're damaging the pons in the brain, which is our autonomic breathing center, and that keeps us breathing at night. So sleep apnea, the pons, if it's damaged, will not let you continue to breathe. And that's why a lot of people need the CPAPs. And so, the only way you can tell is by doing a sleep study. Like I was not tired. I was crushing my workouts. I was working all day long. I was 18, 19 hours. I was loving it. And then I did a sleep study because that's what my patients needed. But I need to do it first so I can tell you how it's going to be when you sleep for 3 nights with stuff hooked up to you. And we got the report back and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like it was bad. Like my oxygen stats were in the low mid 80s for a long time. And I just stopped breathing. I had no idea. And so that's when I got on the CPAP. I had no symptoms, but I was like, I don't want to die. And so the research was showing me that this is the path I was on. And so that's why I started using the CPAP.
And how does a person's pons become damaged typically?
So there's a lot of different ways. Medical injections of a variety of different chemicals will create issues. So anytime that somebody has an issue, whether it's physical trauma, chemical trauma, or whatever, and we start seeing any issues with the facial nerve, so any Bell's palsy issues, anything like you've seen the news a little bit later, that nucleus is in the pons. So anything that's going to damage that, any whiplash, any trauma to that area can start to do that. Hypoxic from any type of other injuries can do it as well. If you get knocked out, you don't breathe for a little bit, we can have damage there. So, but a lot of people just don't know. And so like when we do the full assessment, calcium CTs for that plaquing, sleep studies and hormone studies, everybody gets day one, just so that we make sure your brain is getting the food, the direction, and the oxygen it needs to actually function. And you'd be shocked at how many people who are 30 years old are way messed up on those. They might not have symptoms yet, but they're totally jacked up. And we get them all that stuff, and then like a month later, they're like, my life is totally different. And it's really cool to see.
And I could see that with the younger generation. Now I have a baby, so like I'm seeing how people are being grown now. And I understand like these issues are so complex, like, being in the health and wellness space now for a couple of years, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just diet and exercise. It's so simple, right? No. How are you, like, there's so many things about the baby that like, how are you treated as a baby? Like, did you sleep as a baby? Did you like build throughout your life these good sleep habits? Were you kept up all hours of the night? Do you come from a house that was just loud all the time and you never really like trained your body on how to sleep? Like, now I understand all these things affect people going into their teens, their 20s, their 30s. That habit never changes unless you consciously change it. And I know with kids now, every kid has a cell phone. Every kid's playing video games. I was playing video games when I was a kid, but there was a cutoff time, right? Like you go to bed and it wasn't great. But now it's like kids are up till 2 a.m. playing video games, and then they're going to school at 7 a.m. And it's like, okay, well, how are you sleeping? Where are you sleeping? So I can see, and then if they're playing sports, if they're in some kind of club, whatever it is, they've got social media businesses, you know what I mean? Like kids are on Twitch, like it's endless for a kid now. So like, I can see how a 30-year-old, even a 25-year-old would come to you thinking they're doing okay, but their sleep is just a disaster.
Well, and I always tell people, if you're trying to walk out of the room and you're off by 1 degree, you're still going to make it to the door and get out. The problem is if you sail from Miami to Spain and you're off by 1 degree, you're going to end up in a completely different country. So this isn't an issue of, hey, I had a hardcore weekend of gaming. Fine, no big deal. Like, sleep a little bit extra, you'll be fine. But if it's like, hey, my life is crazy. I don't get enough sleep. I don't eat right every day. Like there's little things that are just picking me apart every day. you're going to be a wreck in 5, 10, 15 years. And that you're not going to notice it. It's so funny. Like when we do the hormones are the easy example. When we get guys on testosterone for 3 or 4 months, they call me up and they're like, hey man, I feel pretty awesome. I don't think I need this anymore. I'm like, cool, just you can jump off. And they're like, great. And 3 weeks later, they call me back and they're like, I think I'm going to die. And we'll pull their hormones again. Like, I feel so bad. I'm exhausted. Everything hurts. I'm depressed. I have anxiety. We'll pull their hormones and it's like within 10% of where it was when we started. And I'm like, and they're like, how come I feel so bad now? I'm like, because you know the difference. Because testosterone is a 7-day half-life. So after 3 weeks, it's mostly all out of your system. So you go from 1,000 back down to 200, 300, you're going to notice that difference. I tell people it's like driving a Ferrari for a month and going back to a Toyota Corolla. There's something wrong with your Corolla, but now you know the difference.
Yeah.
And so when people see the difference, if that's how your body's supposed to work, and this is how you are now, they're like, holy, this is how I was for years? I'm like, yeah. This is why you never got anything done. This is why you hated your life. This is why everything was so miserable. This is why you're always depressed. And they're like, dude, I got to get back on. And it's like, look, what I want you to understand is that you're not on something. We're using something to pull your body back to where it's naturally supposed to be.
Right.
So it would be like, well, I only drink like a little bit of water every day and I hurt all the time. Well, it's because you're supposed to have more water than you're getting. It's not that you took a thimble full of water and you drank, oh, hey, I drank something for today. No, you need 80% of your body weight in ounces. So that's why you feel so much better when you're hydrated. Same exact thing. When you get what the body needs physiologically, you feel great. And so that's the big point of, are you getting the oxygen? Are you finding a way to de-stress? For these kids, you got to get them a lot of methylated B vitamins, specifically folic acid and B6. B6 keeps your liver clean. So you got to process all this stuff as you're growing. Lots of omega-3 fatty acids to help grow the brain. Folic acid helps the brain grow and heal and regenerate. So you have to understand when you have a baby, people are like, well, that's a little adult. It is so radically not an adult. The brain, the gut, none of that stuff's developed yet. They're not really what you would consider an adult person until they're like 8, 9, or 10. The brain's still radically growing until that point. So giving them the omega-3 fatty acids, giving them all of this, the CoQ10, the things they need to create ATP to feed the brain is super important. But at the same time, we got to keep all the sugar out of our kids, because if they're not massive ectomorphs, that sugar is going to create inflammation that's going to decrease function in the brain. And if we don't have our guts not properly functioning, we're not going to get the nutrients for the adrenals. We're going to lose adrenaline, norepinephrine, that type of thing. And we're going to end up with ADD. So these are the things we got to recognize with these kids is if we don't feed them super high-end stuff, they're not going to get it from their normal food. Like my kids, I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they both take about 15 pills a day of just random supplements. And we feed them really good stuff. It's just the food we have today doesn't have the nutrients you need to get the nutrients you need.
That's what really turned me on to supplements, because for a while I was very anti-supplement. I'm like, I'll just get everything from my diet. I eat a healthy diet. And then I really started to look at it and go, it doesn't matter, because the amount of toxicity that's just around me, even take away the food, and there's toxicity in the food too, which I come to later find out, it's so overwhelming that I need to actually put stuff back in my body that can get my body working just a baseline so that I can like counteract all of this stuff. Now, you know, the supplements I take, I try to be strategic and I kind of shuffle stuff in, shuffle stuff out. I'll try some things here and there. But at the end of the day, it's like, even if you have the most healthy diet, it doesn't matter, because you're breathing in something, you're exposed to something, stuff is going in your skin, what you're wearing. Even the sun to some extent is going to give you some level of toxicity that you're going to have to counteract with some sort of supplementation, because it's just not in the world that we live in anymore.
Well, and that's a big thing. The other thing is that when people Google nutrition facts on broccoli or apples or whatever it is, you have to understand that rating that it's giving you is the very best option for that fruit or vegetable at its peak ripeness. Nothing you buy from the store is going to be anywhere near peak ripe, because they have to pick it long before it's ripe so that it won't rot. Then they ship it in, which is why if you go to Hawaii and you eat a pineapple out of the ground in Hawaii, it's amazing. And you eat the same one. I had a pineapple at the store at Kroger, and it was nothing like this. It's because it wasn't ripe yet. If you go overseas and you eat the fruits that come from these farmers markets overseas, they're just amazing. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that cucumbers had this type of flavor. Yeah, it's because you keep getting the ones that are right, that are not even right, that don't have all the nutrients in it yet. And so that's our other big problem is that we look online and we're like, well, I'm getting all these nutrients. You're not, because it's not right. So that's the other big piece why we have to supplement. So it's funny because I take 50 or 60 supplements a day, but my stress level and my functionality is a little bit different than the average bear. So, but I take a ton, because if it's like, I made the decision that if I looked at the end of the day, it's like, hey, you spent 20 or 50 or $100 more per month than you needed to on supplements, I would actually be happy. Because what I don't want to do is be 1% off. I don't want to try to be like, well, I'm not going to take this one today, but because I'm worried about, taking 25 pills instead of 20. So that's just how I've chosen to live my life. But, and everybody can kind of do their own thing. But a lot of my patients are now growing their own stuff. And it's so funny because they'll come in and be like, I didn't know strawberries could taste like this. I didn't know cucumbers had flavor. And I'm like, yeah. So they'll go through and they'll grow it all. They're like, it's a giant pain in the ass to grow my own stuff, but it's so different that I feel like I have to. Mm-hmm. And so that's where this comes in. You either take the time and effort to grow your own stuff and really spend time on it, or you take it as a supplement. Those are kind of your only choices, and it sucks, but that's where we're at.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the methylated B vitamins quite a bit. And can you explain why that's so important, methylated B vitamins specifically?
Yeah. So a lot of times it's legal to market something to the masses if it's on the path. So you could buy a B vitamin that's not fully methylated and your body might not use it. So there's two big groups of people who have what's called MTFHR, which is they just genetically cannot methylate B vitamins very well at all. So they're going to have issues with pregnancy. They're going to have issues with brain, redeveloping brain, stuff like that, because they can't methylate folic acid and those type of things. So they have to take methylated B vitamins. But here's the kicker. If you're stressed out, your body won't methylate very well at all. And so now you're super stressed out. You really need the B vitamins to keep everything functioning, and your body just doesn't process them through. So I'm like, look, if you're going to take a B vitamin, spend an extra 10 cents and get the methylated version of that B vitamin, and that'll help quite a bit. So for instance, the biggest issue with this is you've heard of gallstones, right? Mm-hmm. There's no such thing. So what I was saying was, here's my ring, here's my hand. This is my ring in my hand. It's not a hand ring. It's a ring that was placed in my hand. Bile salts congeal when they lose B6, specifically methylated B6. As those bile salts congeal in the liver, they get pushed down into the gallbladder, because the gallbladder is a bag. It just holds stuff, doesn't make anything. So when it holds those congealed bile salts, which are really liver salts, and they form into stones, what we call gallstones, and people go, oh, we'll just cut the gallbladder out, we'll fix this problem. No, the problem is in the liver. So if you have goo in your pocket of your pants, it's because you put the goo there. Don't cut the pocket out and think you fixed it. So we've got to get those methylated B vitamins in so that the liver can actually function, so it can produce bile, so we can digest our fats, and so that the liver can actually clean the body. So that's one of those big pieces that we see with not getting methylated B vitamins in, specifically on people who are stressed out. So that's the big piece of why we need methylation, because that's the actual chemical the body uses, and we can't take it from raw substrate or raw materials into fully methylated B vitamins under stress, or if we have genetic mutations.
So the methylation is a way that is basically, obviously, taking a shortcut away from all of the complex biochemistry. The methylation is the liver's way to get stuff out to the gallbladder easier.
Correct. It helps the whole body function. So it's like having a car with no wheels. You got a great car, can't go anywhere, can't really do anything. Put the wheels on it, all of a sudden now it can work. And so that's kind of the idea.
Got you. And, I know we're about to end soon, but I did want to ask you about concussions, because I was reading on your website that you work a lot with concussions. What is the big thing you see and that you help treat with concussions?
So if we have athletes who we think are going to be running a risk of getting a concussion, I want them to always have creatine in their system during that a sporting event or whatever, where you might get a concussion. We see that helping a lot. Methylated folic acid, CoQ10, omega-3 fatty acids, and then the biggest one is hyperbaric. The more oxygen you can get to the brain, and hyperbaric actually forces oxygen into plasma, so you can carry 1,000% more oxygen in your body than normal. That oxygen not only helps radically decrease inflammation, which is counterproductive to the brain, but also helps the brain to heal and regenerate. We've gotten guys who are, NFL guys and stuff like that, who, like, oh, you're out for 6 weeks, and 2 weeks later they pass all their tests, they're back on the field. So it's dealing with how the body actually functions and rebuilding all that stuff. So the oxygen, the hyperbaric function, the getting the chemicals the body needs to rebuild those nerve pathways is really, really important. And
I see, because you work with athletes, this whole issue with like knee injuries. Knee injuries are so common, especially in football, probably in soccer too, especially in basketball. Is this a problem that's kind of newer? Like, obviously athletes have been blowing out their knees for years, but it seems like it's actually more common now, maybe because there's higher levels of inflammation. People are carrying out higher levels of inflammation. Is this something that you've noticed? Are you taking any steps towards that? Or is this just kind of like, well, this was just kind of bound to happen based on like the odds of the sport that the person plays?
So traumatic hits. So if you're running and somebody puts their face mask or their helmet on your knee and blows it out, there's nothing we can do for that. Right. But what we see a lot of is because of like squats with the barbell.
Right, like Odell Beckham in the Super Bowl. Nobody touched him. He was like by himself, completely blew his ACL.
So what happens with a lot of that is the pelvis starts to get out of position, and the femur actually rotates with the ilium or with the hip. And as the femur rotates up top, it rotates at the knee. And so what ends up happening is that when you put a force into that, it just blows out. And so balancing the musculature of the pelvis, the iliopsoas or the hip flexor, the glute med, the hamstrings, getting all that balance is super important. We see a lot of female athletes blow their knees out because their pelvis is shaped totally different than a man's. So that the angle from the femurs down to the knees is actually 30% larger in a woman than it is in a man. Thus, we have a lot more force at the knee. Plus, a woman's pelvis puffs up with blood once a month and comes back together. Sometimes it doesn't come all the way back together. And so that when the pelvis is out of alignment, what ends up happening is the forces at the hips and the knees are substantially higher, but you have tons of muscle and ligaments and everything holding the hip together. You've got no muscle, only ligaments and tissue holding the knee together. And so that's where the knee blows out a lot more often. So getting that pelvis balanced and get those musculature reset is super important for things like that. So the first thing I do with all my high-end athletes is I make them quit doing barbell squats because I want them to actually train the individual legs and get them balanced. I've got tons of pro athletes that when I have them do single leg squats, their knees start wobbling a lot because that knee is unstable and it's not strong enough. As they do these single leg squats and they force that knee to do the work, that knee will get stronger and we see a lot less damage to the hips and knees.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. I want to talk so much more about that, but I know we got a hard out right now. Maybe we'll have you back for round 2 and talk about knees and elbows and toes and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
This has been great, Dr. Chalmers. If somebody wants to learn more about you, work with you, follow you, where would they go online to do all that?
So all my social media is just Dr. Chalmers and the number 1, and then chalmerswellness.com is probably the best website to go to.
And do you work with people virtually? Like if somebody not by you is listening, wants to work with you, do you do that? Or do they have to come to your physical clinic?
No, we work with people all over the world. So we can do, I help people like, hey, here's your labs. Here's what you need to do. Go find this. Like there's a lot of, America still has some of the best doctors. When I work with people from Canada or from UK or Australia, they're like, well, this is what my doctor's doing and have me do. And I'm like, there's not even a logical path to where they're going. So we work with a lot of people all around the world.
Got you. Cool. We'll put all that in the show notes so people can find you easily and make sure they connect with you. All awesome. Right. Well, yes, Dr. Chalmers, thank you so much for joining us on the Holistic Nootropics podcast. Listener, viewer, if you enjoyed this, leave us a comment down below. Give us a big thumbs up. Rate us over on Apple Podcasts. And until next time, everybody, peace.
Thanks for listening. For more brain-boosting info, in-depth articles, and show notes, check out holisticnootropics.com.